Good evening. I apologize for the short delay in the beginning, but this program is going to be great. I'm Gaurav Pranami, the president of ISU Vegetarians and Vegans, a student organization at Iowa State University. And I'm proud to welcome you to the part 2 of the Sustainable Food Conference, which has been sponsored by ISU's Lectures Committee. Yesterday, we had a very inspiring discussion on the effects of animal agriculture on environment and world hunger. Following on that, the theme of tonight's discussion will be the cultural and health benefits of vegan diet. Dr. Will Tuttle will lead the discussion with Harold Brown and Erica Schusch. Dr. Will Tuttle is a Dharma master in Zen tradition and has practiced meditation for over 30 years, studying contemplative Christianity and a variety of non-Western spiritual traditions. He received doctorate in education from University of California, Berkeley. His PhD dissertation focused on educating intuition in adults and was nominated for Best Dissertation Award. He has taught college courses in creativity, humanities, mythology, religion, and philosophy, and has created 7 CD albums of original piano music. Dr. Will Tuttle is recipient of the Peace Abbey's Courage of Conscience Award and has lectured and performed widely throughout North America and Europe. His book, The World Peace Diet, has been called the most important book of our time. He is noted for his clear and inspiring presentations that include original music and evocative art by his spouse, Madeleine, who herself is a visionary artist from Switzerland. Dr. Tuttle has been a vegetarian since 1975 and has been a vegan for 28 years. So without further delay, please join me in welcoming Dr. Will Tuttle.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Gaurav, and welcome everyone to round 2 of our discussion of the power of veganism as a social transformative benevolent force. And I would like to begin by actually first, just because we'll probably not get to this later, I'd like to just have a round of applause for the ISU Vegetarian Vegans for all the work they've done here. Thank you so much again for putting this on. It's really... It's through, I think, Madeleine and I have been living now, we're in our 13th year of traveling in a rolling home and living without a house, with no real estate, just living on the road in a solar-powered RV. And in all the travels that we do, actually this year we were doing over 200 presentations, and the feeling I have is that there's the real power and life and energy and vigor of what's happening that's positive in our country is happening like this at the grassroots level with people like ISU Vegetarian Vegans, just calling people together, and we get to come together and talk about the issues that are important to us, how we can build a more compassionate and wise and sustainable world. So that's what we'll be talking about tonight. I'll be talking a little bit about the ideas in the World Peace Diet, and I'd like to actually begin, I think, with just some images and some music to kind of just set the tone for the evening, because very often this whole thing gets kind of abstract. We're talking about animals, and it's still relatively abstract. I think if they were right in here in the room with us, that's probably what we should do next. We should have some chickens, cows, pigs, and all kinds of wild animals in here, and we could, because these are real beings with interests. We, in our culture, very often the closest anyone ever gets to animals is when they eat them, and that's not really very conducive to developing a sense of the sacredness and the beauty and the uniqueness and the personality. I mean, people who have chickens, for example, as like on sanctuaries and things, are always so amazed at how every single one of the animals has her own unique personality. And so, and the other thing is, I think, to just reconnect, if we can, within ourselves with the feeling that nature is a celebration, that life is a celebration, and that it is essentially enormously beautiful. If we can go into nature with these eyes and cultivate this way of seeing and see life as a celebration, I think we're all born in a culture that directly and indirectly warps our perception so that we look at things more just as half dead. I mean, it's hard to say this exactly, but I've had this experience myself that sometimes the vision suddenly clears and we see the life flowing through trees and forests and birds and the amazing beauty of this planet. And I think once we have that connection, we have a yearning to protect it. Besides the fact that it's our home, and the home that we'll have, only home we'll have here on this in this solar system, and for our children as well. So this presentation, very brief. It's going to be 6 minutes long. What it's going to be is some images, some slides of animals, the beings we call animals, as if we're not animals. I mean, we are also mammals with a reproductive, and other systems, and that have drives and so forth. But the non-human animals, and of their lives, and with it, I'm going to just sit at the piano and play a piece of music, sort of as an accompaniment to that. And the melody that I usually play with this, because it just seems somehow to go together well. And in fact, while I'm thinking of it, if you are interested in ever seeing this again, it's on YouTube. You can just type in Will Tuttle, and it'll come right up. And it's all. You could also type in Our Fellow Mortals. That's the title of it, Our Fellow Mortals. And there's a link actually to it on our website, worldpeacediet.org. But the music that goes with it will be a melody that came to me, actually. It was inspired by an unlikely creature, by a little mouse. And I know in our culture, again, we tend to think of mice as just not worth even thinking about. But I think if we really get to know any animal, any creature, we see this amazing intelligence, actually. They are operating. And Madeline and I actually moved into a house in Northern California number of years ago, and when we moved in, it was way out in the middle of nowhere, and there were a lot of mice. And so one day I was transporting these mice to another place, and I put the mouse in it. She was in a jar on our grand piano, and I just started playing. And I'm a composer of piano music, and it was like her being just pulled this music out of me as an inspiration. So I've always thought of this as the mouse piece. It's on the album we have called Islands of Light. So enjoy, sit back, relax, and just take in the images and open to the beauty and the celebration of the beings that we share this planet with. And the music that's going with it is the piece called The Song for the Earth, but I call it the mouse piece. Enjoy. we turn this off, or what do we do now? Anybody know? Okay, so thank you all again for joining us this evening, and I'd like to just say a couple more words here before we introduce Erica, who will be our first presenter. And I guess the main point I want to maybe just sort of open here, besides the idea that animals have lives, they have interests, they have yearnings, they have a positive contribution that they do make to our planet in their own right, to the ecology, and not just that, but that they are the subjects of their lives, and they have a subjective experience that to them is precious, and just like our life to us is precious. And so we have this tendency to I have to say this really, as a culture, we're again forced by our the underlying assumptions in our food system to look at animals as commodities. How many of you in here were actually here yesterday and heard everything, more or less? So quite a few new people, it looks like. All right, so maybe I'll just very briefly lay out the sort of the main ideas before we go into this a little more. Veganism is a word that it has a connotation of being very radical, right? It's like this radical, extreme idea. And I would argue that it's not at all radical, and it's really our basic fundamental nature. We are, at heart, we're all vegans, everyone. I believe every human being in our core is a vegan. And what the man who coined the word said that the word means this. He said, Donald Watson in 1944 made this word vegan, and he said it has to be pronounced, he said it's V-E-G-A-N, and it's pronounced vegan, not vegan or vegan. That's why he said so. Anyway, he said, veganism is a philosophy and way of life which seeks to exclude, as far as possible and practical, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. And he went on to say that it, by extension, it seeks to create animal-free alternatives. So, for the benefit of humans, animals, and the environment. So this was back in 1944, and the basic idea there, as you see, is veganism is simply making the effort to live a life where I'm not causing cruelty to animals. Is that really so extreme? And I think all of us in our hearts, if we were going down the street and we saw someone abusing a dog, say, or something, we would try to stop that, because there's something in us that recognizes that if an animal is vulnerable in our hands, it is a hideous thing to then torment and to hurt that defenseless being. So this is our natural, inherent compassion and sanity just spontaneously expressing. However, we're all born into a culture where we are forced to participate from the time we're born, practically. I mentioned yesterday, just look at the baby food jars and you'll see turkey, chicken, beef, cheese, everything, all of it right there in the little baby food jars. So we're forced to eat the flesh and secretions of animals that have been brutalized in a variety of ways, hyper-confined, dominated, exploited, and begin this journey of this behavior, and we're forced into it by every institution in our culture, by our parents, by their parents, by our relatives, by the educational and governmental and media, all the different institutions. So this is the situation, and in the World Peace Diet, I go at length into the amazing repercussions of this that no one, as far as I can tell, really has ever talked about before, and how it affects us spiritually, psychologically, socially, culturally, anthropologically, how it affects the environment, how it affects the beings that we call wild animals. And that's what we're going to be going into tonight. So it's exciting. Hang on to your hats. It's quite a ride. It's really an adventure, an exploration into self-discovery. We will not ever, will we? I mean, don't you think this is true? We'll never understand ourselves very well if we don't understand our culture. Because at a very deep level, our culture, we not only live in a culture, that culture lives in us. We just, as little babies and kids, and as we grow up, we're like sponges. We just soak it in at such a deep level. And so the underlying assumptions of our culture live in us. And as I said yesterday, these are assumptions of reductionism, of commodification of life, turning beings into things, of exclusion, and that these are the very mentalities, predation, disconnectedness, these are the mentalities that stop us, I think, in our efforts to live wisely and humanely and with wisdom and joy and peace and beauty and love and freedom and creativity and all the things that we yearn for in our lives. So if we're serious about being a positive force for change in the world, we are obliged, I believe, at the fundamental level, to look at the living fury at the core of our culture, which is this massive brutality. We're killing 75 million animals every day, just in the United States. It's massive. To look into that, and then to discover in our hearts what is ours to do. How are we to live? And do we feel right contributing to that and continuing that cycle of violence and that manifests in so many different ways, and the beauty of the possibilities that we have actually to make a change. So I'd like to invite my wonderful spouse, Madeline, to come to the front just for a minute, just so you can get to meet her. We actually went vegetarian, I think, basically at the same time. When was it? 35 years ago, 33 years ago, something like that. She was in Switzerland, I was here, and we didn't meet for another, 20 years. But she's the artist who has painted these paintings of these animals, and maybe she can just say a little bit about the paintings and the art and so forth.
Thank you, Will. I really liked this slideshow. Thank you. This is so beautiful. How many of you would like to have this continued, that we have the wild animals out there? The beautiful birds, the butterflies, it's like the dolphins, the turtles. And I think we can all do something for that. Every single person in this room, if we change to a plant-based diet, we give back their environment, we give back their place to be, to live, and to have their lives. And I'm really just committed to work for this and painting the beauty of these wild animals. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll just close with this little interesting fact that I read recently in an article. Biologists have a way of estimating biomass. Biomass is the weight of physical bodies on the Earth. And the estimates are, according to this article that I read, that if you go back roughly 10,000 years, which was basically the dawning of the time when we first started owning animals. Okay, we started for the very first time herding animals roughly 8 to 10,000 years ago in what is today Iraq. At that point, the biomass of human beings was less than 1% of the biomass of all the animals on the planet, right? So you have lots of wildlife, 99%, and humans were 1%. Today, just a mere 10,000 years later, which is just a flash of an eye, right, in terms of the bigger picture of the life of the Earth. Today, human beings and the animals that we own as property are now 98% of the biomass. So wild animals have gone in a mere flash of an eye from being 99% of all the life on the Earth to less than 2%, or roughly 2%. And the same thing has happened in the oceans as well. I mean, they've been completely devastated. The people that came over on the ships from Europe when they first landed on the North American continent, you can read in their writing in the ship's logs, they were afraid they were going to run aground on the schools of fish that were so thick. I mean, the oceans and the land were just absolutely celebrating life, and now there's just basically all the fisheries in the ocean are collapsed, and we've completely strip mined. We've devastated this planet. Right now, there should be a sense of urgency about this, I think, because if things continue the way they're going, there will not be human beings much longer, and that's well known. Science is, scientists sort of, we're definitely at the tipping point. Are we at the point of no return yet? Some scientists say we are, in terms of global warming, in which animal agriculture is the number one driving force behind global warming. In terms of species loss of genetic diversity, of which animal agriculture is the number one driving force behind that too, because we're taking their habitat away for grazing and especially for crops. We go to South America and just see the whole rainforest being cut down to grow soybeans, and it's not for tofu. The soybeans is how you fatten up animals. So I really feel a sense of urgency is appropriate. Do we want to be able to continue as a species carrying on, or are we going to commit ecocide and suicide? And it is by eating burgers that we are committing suicide, for sure. I mean, that is the driving force. So I'd like to turn it over now to Erica, and she will be doing a presentation for us here, and it's called Vegan Nutrition, the Benefits and the Barriers, and I'll say this a little bit about Erica. She's the founder and director of the Center for Plant-Based Diet Development. The website is plantbaseddiet.org, with hyphens in between. I'm sure you'll have it up there. An Iowa nonprofit organization based in Ames. She received her BA from Harvard University with a major in biology and a minor in visual and environmental studies. Has a master's in botany from Iowa State University, where she works as a research associate and teaching assistant in the Department of Food Science and Human Nutrition. She's been a vegetarian for 22 years and a vegan for over 10 years, including during pregnancy and lactation. So let's give a big hand to Erica for being with us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Will. I'm very happy to see all of you here, especially my family in the second to last row. My name is Erica, and I am going to be talking, like Will said, about vegan nutrition, the benefits of it, as well as the barriers. And by barriers, I mean the social barriers that can prevent people from choosing to be vegan. My presentation will have 5 parts. First, I'm going to introduce you to the Center for Plant-Based Diet Development. Then I'll talk about vegan nutrition, the benefits of vegan nutrition, which are to human health and animal welfare and the environment. I'll next talk about barriers to the adoption of vegan diets. Those include culture, information transfer problems, economic forces, and government actions. And finally, I'll talk about overcoming barriers. Our mission at the Center for Plant-Based Diet Development, which is an Iowa nonprofit organization based here in Ames, is to educate the public about the benefits of plant-based diets so that the demand for plant-based foods will increase, allowing these benefits to be obtained. And this, I feel, is a very powerful idea because you, all of you, through your demand that you place when you buy something, can affect the bigger picture of what happens to animals throughout the world. Our vision, we envision a future in which people choose plant-based diets to create a compassionate and sustainable society, one that benefits people, non-human animals, and the ecosystems to which we all belong. What exactly are plant-based diets? This is a definition I would give. Plant-based diets are founded on whole grains, legumes, vegetables, including leafy green vegetables, those favorite leafy green things that we probably don't eat enough of, fruits, nuts and seeds, and vitamin B12 supplementation if your diet does not have any animal products in it. There are 3 major types of plant-based diets. The one we're talking about tonight is a vegan diet, and that is a diet in which your nourishment is obtained from non-animal sources. And like Will said, it's part of vegan living, where you avoid animal products to protect animals from unethical treatment and to reduce their suffering. You also, beyond just protecting them by not eating them, you do try to treat sentient beings kindly, including other humans who are animals. You don't use them as a means to an end. You don't use them. Ovo-lacto-vegetarian diets, I'm familiar with that. I was an ovo-lacto-vegetarian for 10 years, includes eggs and milk, and indirectly supports slaughter of animals because, of course, the cows and the chickens will be killed. Finally, there are diets with small amounts of animal flesh, and they do reduce but still support the intentional harm to animals. I do recognize, though, that many people will transition to vegetarianism through the stage of eating a little bit of meat. And my philosophy is any reduction is better than no reduction. Vegan nutrition. This, by the way, is a young vegetarian who I know very well because he's my child. The American Dietetic Association position paper on vegetarian diets from 2003 says that well-planned vegan and other types of vegetarian diets are appropriate for all stages of the life cycle, including during pregnancy, lactation, infancy, childhood, and adolescence. So I was vegan when I was pregnant, and I always tell my husband, who wonders sometimes about the health of vegan diets, look, if I could be pregnant and give birth and have a healthy child, and that's the time of life when you're supposed to need the most nutrients, surely then someone who's not pregnant and is healthy in all respects would be able to be vegan. The American Dietetic Association goes on to say that appropriately planned vegetarian diets are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and provide health benefits in the prevention and treatment of certain diseases. The Harvard School of Public Health, I like them not just because I went to Harvard, but I like them for this reason. They say, go with plants. Eating a plant-based diet is healthiest. Make red meat, beef, pork, and lamb only an occasional part of your diet, if you eat it at all. Skip the processed stuff, bacon, hot dogs, deli meats, since that's also been linked to higher cancer risk. I was going to ask you, what is the one nutrient that you can get from animals but not from plants? And you can now guess the answer because it's vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is very important. We need it because it helps us maintain a healthy nervous system and form our red blood cells. The vegan source is cyanocobalamin, which is synthesized by certain bacteria and is converted by the human body to an active form of B12. What many people may not realize is the reason they eat animals or animal fluids to get vitamin B12 is that animals obtain the bacteria from nature. These bacteria make the vitamin B12. It's not the animal cells producing the vitamin B12 on their own. Recommendations for vitamin B12 are very interesting. Of course, vegans do need it. You need a supplement because you won't get it from any source besides the bacteria. It's also recommended for ovo-lacto vegetarians. So even if you're having milk and eggs, apparently it may not give you enough vitamin B12. And what I found out in doing research for this slideshow is that actually the Food and Nutrition Board of the Institute of Medicine recommends that all people over age 50 take a vitamin B12 supplement because the ability to absorb vitamin B12 from animal products is reduced after age 50. So it's not just vegans. Becoming a vegan then, as I see it, comes down to this basic question: what is your choice going to be for your vitamin B12? Either you choose what's on the left, animals, or you would choose bacteria with vitamin B12 supplements. This is a $4 bottle of vitamin B12. I picked it up at Hy-Vee. If you actually figured out how much is in here, it's 25,000 micrograms. You are requiring 2.4 micrograms per day. So this bottle would have enough for 28 years, except this has an expiration date on it. That's only 3 years. But if you could divide among all the people in the room, this would keep you going for a lot of time. So this is why people eat meat and dairy products, because they're not eating this. Protein. You used to hear people complaining about, oh, protein, how are you going to get protein if you're vegan? Most people don't do that now because it's well known you can get adequate protein. You can eat whole grains, legumes, seeds, and nuts. And you should get about 10% of your calorie intake as protein, which is 50 grams. Depends on how many calories you need. But I'm not dying of protein nutrition deficiency yet, so I think I'm managing to eat enough legumes and whole grains. You don't have to combine them at the same meal. What's important is to have a variety so that you're not just depending on only legumes or only grains. You probably can survive, and many people do, by eating rice, because about 10% of the calories in rice is protein. But then you fill up on rice, so you don't have a lot of room for everything else. So it's best to get the legumes and the grains in your diet. Calcium can also be obtained on a vegan diet. The Harvard School of Public Health says milk isn't the only or even the best source of calcium. High milk intake can increase the risk of prostate cancer and possibly ovarian cancer. Good vegan sources of calcium include broccoli and some leafy green vegetables like kale and collards and bok choy. I'm sure we've all had a lot tonight, right? I haven't. But I do like broccoli. We eat that very often. Spinach is not recommended for calcium because it has a lot of oxalic acid, I believe, but it is good for iron. You can get calcium from legumes, tofu, almonds, fortified products, and supplements. You need about 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams per day. Iron deficiency anemia is no more common in vegetarians than among the general population. Non-heme iron is less readily absorbed than heme iron from animals. However, when you have vitamin C in your diet, which you do when you are a vegan, you will get enough iron absorption. Vegan nutrition also involves getting omega-3 fatty acids, and everyone needs them. The essential fatty acid, alpha-linolenic acid, is plentiful in flax seeds, canola oil, and walnuts. We're supposed to consume about 3 to 6 grams of this per day. So you can get that by having some canola oil or flax seeds or flax oil. And it's crucial, say nutritionists, that the ratio of alpha-linolenic acid to another essential fatty acid, an omega-6 fatty acid, linoleic acid, should be about 1 to 2. So you don't want to go overboard with corn oil or safflower oil, which have a lot of linoleic acid. Why do we need alpha-linolenic acid? One reason is we convert it to long-chain fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids, you've probably heard of them, DHA, or EPA, not the Environmental Protection Agency. DHA is docosahexaenoic acid, and that's a structural lipid in our brains and retina. The body levels of DHA and EPA are lower in vegans than in meat eaters. Excuse me. There we go. The recommended daily intake is 500 milligrams, but you don't have to take it. Actually, studies have found that vegans have not been found to have any problems from having lower DHA levels. However, if you want to be sure that you're getting enough, you can take a supplement from algae. So while I was pregnant, I did take algae DHA. It didn't seem to harm my child, so hopefully it actually helped. These supplements are either Omega Zen vegan capsules or V-Pure, which is a new one. It came out in 2006. It has both EPA and DHA. And the benefit of this is that you don't have to have any fish killed, and you can avoid the toxins that are in fish. Because if you were to, for example, try to get the DHA you need per day from tuna, you could not eat enough tuna. Women are only supposed to have 8 ounces, and that would give you less than 500 milligrams of DHA or EPA per week. So you really can't rely straight on tuna fish. There are other fish that may be better in that regard. But why, when you can get algae oil that would provide you those same benefits? What are these benefits? Well, the benefits, as you will see on our flyer, which is back there, it's the green one. Please take it if you'd like to have this information in writing. Plant-based diets are good for the earth, good for animals, good for you. Health benefits include reduced obesity, cardiovascular disease, and cancer of the colon and rectum, breast cancer, and prostate cancer. Vegan diets can help treat diseases as well. For example, reversing heart disease, which has been shown to be effective when you have exercise along with a vegan diet. And also recently, vegan diets have been found to help with the control of type 2 diabetes. They're healthful because they lack saturated animal fat, cholesterol, and meat carcinogens, which you maybe didn't realize as you were growing up, actually are formed in meat as meat is cooked. Vegan diets contain plentiful fiber, antioxidants, and vitamins, which is another reason they're healthful. Several studies found that vegetarian men and women have 31% and 20% lower death rates from heart disease compared to non-vegetarians. And vegan men actually have a lower risk of heart disease compared to ovo-lacto vegetarian men. So the benefits of low cholesterol really are very well established. Red meat has been found to cause colon cancer, or at least they would say increase the risk of colon cancer. So men and women who ate respectively 3 and 2 ounces of red meat per day had a risk of colon cancer increasing by 30 to 40% compared to just eating meat twice per week. Processed meat was even worse. Eating 1 ounce per day for a man or 2 ounces per week for a woman increased colon cancer risk by 50%. So the conclusion of this study was less red meat is better. It's also been found that women eating meat and high-fat dairy foods increase their risk of developing a certain type of breast cancer, which is very common. They have a reduced risk of 33% compared to women who are eating very little animal fat. Vegetable fats were found to be healthful, so it was actually the fat in the animal products that was increasing the chance of having estrogen-responsive breast cancer. It's also been found, and my husband likes to talk about this, that dairy protein is associated with an increased risk of prostate cancer. And this study is from 2008. It was found that a 35 gram per day increase in consumption of dairy protein increased prostate cancer risk by 32%. Calcium from dairy products was associated with an increase, but calcium from non-dairy sources was not associated with increased risk of prostate cancer. We've talked about health benefits. There are welfare benefits, animal welfare benefits of vegan diets too. And that was the reason I became a vegan. The health benefits were just a perk of it. Vegan diets, like Will has said, reduce the number of animals harmed and killed by people. Farm animals are killed, for example, the male chicks of layer hens and male calves of dairy cows, and wild animals are killed by people and by habitat destruction, such as when you are growing all these crops to feed the livestock. Farm animals are kept in captivity in feedlots and farms, subjected to painful procedures like castration, beak cutting, and dehorning. They're unable to enjoy the full range of experiences within their capacity, such as strong emotional bonds with their family, freedom of motion and mate selection, and a variety of life stages. And finally, they're slaughtered at a young age. These pictures are taken in northwest Iowa. We went there in September. The top one shows pigs in confinement, and the lower one shows cattle in a feedlot in northwest Iowa this September. Animal welfare benefits include the number of animals slaughtered being reduced by being vegan. In the U.S., for example, 34 million cattle are killed per year. In Iowa, it's 810,000. Dairy cows for the U.S., 2.4 million are killed per year. Hogs, in Iowa, 30 million hogs are killed per year out of 105 million total in the U.S. If you go down to chicks, male chicks, these are the baby chicks of egg-layer hens. In the U.S., 219 million of them are killed or allowed to die by suffocation. In Iowa, 40 million. And this is based on the number of egg-layer chicks actually hatched. So if you look at data for Iowa, it says 80 million egg-layer chicks were hatched. And I talked with the USDA. They said that, yes, half of those are the male chicks who will never make it past the day when they hatch. Iowa is the top pig and egg producer state in the nation. We have, on average, right now, for example, 57 million layers, and they consume 57 million corn bushels per year. So these are egg-laying hens in the state. We usually have 16 million pigs living with us in a state with 3 million people. Here's an example of how Iowa pigs are treated. During the floods, you maybe recall, law enforcement officers shot hogs trying to climb to safety atop a levee after they'd escaped from a confinement that had flooded, and no one had been able to, in time, I guess, rescue them, if you could call it rescuing. The law enforcement officers were quoted as saying there's no way to contain the hogs or round them up. Farm Sanctuary, which protects farm animals, rescued 68 pigs from the levee, transported them to their East Coast shelter. The pigs showed typical signs of past abuse that you see in confinements. They had tails having been docked. They were castrated. They had old infected wounds. Dr. Temple Grandin is a well-respected animal scientist within the industry. She says that what has happened to pigs is really the industry standard. For example, killing pigs by blunt trauma, slamming them to the ground, is an industry standard. As is castrating them without any anesthetic, as is shown in this picture. And the National Pork Board says that a sharp, firm blow on the top of the head over the brain is an efficient way of humanely killing pigs less than 3 weeks of age. The reason this is important is recently undercover PETA workers documented abuse happening at a hog farm in Iowa. And the pork companies were quick to say this sort of abuse is not accepted. Some of it definitely is not accepted, such as the vaginal raping with instruments of the female pigs, but the slamming of the piglets and killing them that way, this is what is recommended. The problem was they didn't kill the pigs right away, so they were twitching, but often in confinements, people probably don't check to make sure the little piglets they've killed have died. These are pigs living in Iowa, at least they were in September when I photographed them. You may not be able to see it on the slide, but the pigs had a lot of redness to their eyes and swelling. I tried to ask a professor here at ISU what it may be. He said he didn't know. His involvement in pigs is sustainable agriculture in pigs. So I assume it's conjunctivitis due to their uncleanly conditions. Interestingly, as my spouse and child and I were there and I was taking the picture, a man pulled up in a truck and said, "Hello, and what are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm taking pictures." And my spouse said, "I'm taking pictures of livestock." And he said, "Are you from PETA?" And we said, "No, I'm not currently a member. I was a member. I didn't mention that." So I thought it was very interesting because he pulled up and then he drove away. So they were watching what we were doing and curious. And he wasn't from that farm either. Egg layer hens have their beaks trimmed as little babies, which is painful. It's not like having your fingernails trimmed. Their beaks are innervated. They use them for sensing since they peck to get food. Spent hens are killed after just 1 year. Their normal life would be a lot longer. The male chicks, like we talked about, are killed. They're of no value. They don't put on weight fast enough to be of value to the industry. They are either gassed or crushed, as in this picture, or sometimes ground alive, or just thrown into garbage cans. Dairy cows also are forced to give birth each year to maintain their milk supply and slaughtered for meat after 3 to 4 years. The male calves, again, usually aren't much value for giving milk, and so the veal industry says thanks to them they found a use for the veal calves by killing them right after birth as bob veal or killing them after 3 to 4 months of strict confinement, where the veal industry says, oh yes, they can stand up and lie down and stretch, but the actual veal information from the industry never mentions walking because they're not allowed to walk. Environmental benefits of vegan diets are huge, and this is becoming more important daily, and people are slowly recognizing it, but not quickly enough, according to me. The vegan diet benefits and plant-based diet benefits include reducing the environmental damage caused by animal agriculture, such as global climate change, land and water scarcity, soil degradation and topsoil loss, pollution of the air and water, and loss of biodiversity. Here are some cattle in Iowa at a feedlot, and then that's anhydrous ammonia on the bottom going to be applied, I assume, on the fields. Interestingly, researchers at the University of Chicago have found that switching to a fully plant-based diet from the average American diet, which is 27% of calories from animal products, causes a greater reduction in greenhouse gas emissions than driving an ultra-efficient hybrid Prius instead of an average sedan. So that means if I were a meat eater, I could choose to either become a vegan or go out and spend, $23,000 or $4,000 for a Prius, or if I had a Prius, drive the Prius. So it's easier and less expensive, better for you, better for the planet to simply become a vegan. And yet you don't hear about that very often. You hear about the advantages of the Prius, but not many people are talking about plant-based diets as a method of reducing global warming. Land scarcity is a big issue. Reducing meat consumption would help alleviate land scarcity because grain fed to livestock is the main source of grain often, especially in our state. 30% of the world's grain and 66% of the U.S. grain production goes to feed livestock. The reason for this problem is that animals, especially cattle, convert energy very inefficiently. So to produce 1 kilogram of meat, cattle require 7 kilograms of grain, pigs require 4 kilograms of grain, and broiler chickens require 2 kilograms of grain. In Iowa, if our cropland were not used so extensively for livestock, there would be more land available for conservation areas, land for, if you wanted, biofuel crops or grasses, and also land that you could convert to natural areas to reduce erosion. These are some animals, actually, that my spouse, Paul Hokanson, photographed in Ames. He's also a member of the board of directors of the Center for Plant-Based Diet Development. These animals live in the natural areas within our city, which shows that when you have nature, the animals are going to be able to fill it. But if we went out into the middle of a crop field, I don't think we'd find many of these animals. How many vegans and vegetarians are there? You might think that with all these benefits, there would be a lot, but actually it's quite rare in the developed world. In the United States, 2.5% of adults are vegetarian, which includes vegans, and only 1% of adults are vegan. I like being 1 in 100, but it would be nice if it were, say, 10 in 100. In Canada, 4% of adults are vegetarian, including vegans. So given the benefits, why is it that there aren't many vegans? This brings us to the next part of my talk, which is barriers to choosing veganism. There are cultural barriers, information barriers, economic forces, and government actions that can all make it difficult for you to choose to be vegan. Here's a Visha barbecue booth. If you've ever been to Visha, you may remember walking through clouds of smoke from the burning animals' body parts. Cultural barrier. Here's an example. Killing animals really is encouraged among children. We were at a resort in Okoboji, and there was an arcade there with a little happy pony with hearts on it right next to Big Buck Hunter 2. So it was very odd to see a little child riding on the pony, and then right next to her would be someone with a gun shooting at the bucks. So children really are encouraged to accept killing animals as good and fun and necessary. And they're shielded from knowing about the abuse of animals all around us. Another type of barrier is an information barrier, such as an omission of information. The Iowa Global Warming Campaign has a flyer that it handed out in 2008, and I got it in my hands, and it said, you can help reduce global warming pollution. It said, buy cleaner, more efficient cars. It made no mention of dietary changes. ISU Live Green initiative, which we have here on campus, advocates buying food locally through the Farm to ISU program, which is a great idea. And it does recommend that students share the fridge to help reduce electricity costs, but it has no mention of what you put in the fridge, no mention of reducing meat consumption, especially the flesh from grain-fed pigs and cattle. And I would propose here that the reason for this is that Iowa State depends economically on feeding grain to pigs and cattle. So it will make it much harder psychologically for people to admit that there's part of what they're doing that doesn't fit into the picture of living green. Misinformation is another type of barrier you can confront. Here's a book, my dad had it, from 2007. It's made by doctors, a doctor of cardiology. Vegan diets in this book are portrayed as nutritionally hazardous. It says a vegan diet can, quote, make it challenging to get the essential vitamins, minerals, and protein your body requires. And vegans and vegetarians also miss out on the great health benefits of eating fish. So I can only conclude that they were not aware that for several years now you can get, maybe 6-7 years, you can get algae DHA, which shows you that you can never rank someone's knowledge based on their status within society, whether one is a high school graduate or a doctor of philosophy. All of us can have knowledge, and all of us can lack it. An economic barrier, here's an example of one, university research. ISU research often promotes animal-based diets funded by animal industries. The Iowa Egg Council, for example, spends $400,000 per year on research, most of it going to ISU. The executive director of the Iowa Egg Council says, Iowa State's research findings benefit all egg producers, especially those in Iowa. In 2008, they made a $2 million gift to ISU. There are many government barriers to becoming vegan. One is that the government subsidizes the animal industry. For example, the USDA works to increase exports of beef, poultry, farm-raised catfish even, to other countries through the Foreign Agricultural Services and the Foreign Market Development Program. And their goal is to work with industry to ship the animal products overseas to the rest of the world, where meat consumption is skyrocketing. There's also legislation made that reduces the cost of animal products by allowing factory farms to pollute or not making them pay the costs of fixing their pollution problems. Also by letting ranchers use public land for grazing with very low rent fees. And legislation fails to protect food animals. So it's cheaper not to protect food animals, which therefore makes meat cheaper and dairy products cheaper and eggs cheaper. The U.S. Commodities Food Program in our government purchases meat, milk, and eggs primarily to benefit U.S. agribusiness and distributes them to schools for hamburgers, hot dogs, and chicken nuggets. It spends hundreds of millions of dollars per year. And in 2005, 60% of the money they spent went on to animal products. Only 5% was spent on fruits and vegetables. Ames Elementary School, where my child goes, has a school lunch program I chose this week so you can see. On Monday, they had a choice of hot dog or ham and cheese. On Tuesday, beef or salad with pork. On Wednesday, so that's tomorrow, they get beefy nachos or chicken salad. Thursday, it's a sloppy joe or turkey and cheese. And on Friday, it's cheese pizza or a chicken ranch wrap. If you're vegan, you get a peanut butter and jelly sack lunch every day. And so, oh, yes, Cal? A home lunch, right, like you get. And soy drink is provided if the doctor states there's a medical need. Actually, October 14th of this month, there's a change in the rules for the USDA. Now a parent can write to the school and say, my child has a medical or dietary need to have a substitute for cow's milk. But you still have to say it's a dietary as in medical need. The USDA makes it quite clear it's not just for children's preferences. So if your child happens to have compassion for animals and chooses not to drink cow's milk, they won't get any for you and get reimbursed for it because it's not a medical need. Federal livestock legislation supports animals being killed quickly, and often their experience and how horrible it is not so much of a factor. So there is the U.S. Federal Humane Slaughter Act, and it mandates that livestock must first be unconscious before they're killed. But it excludes poultry. 9 billion birds are killed per year in the U.S. And if you see these hanging there, have their eyes open, they're still aware. Also, it excludes ritual slaughter. So slitting the throat can be, according to Temple Grandin, very humane if you have the animal positioned very carefully so it doesn't know what's happening, and the pain of the cut isn't very, very intense. But if they move around, or if they're slashed and their esophagus is ripped out, as happened in agriprocessors several years ago, and they were cited for that, and then they're dumped on the ground, it would be excruciating and traumatic for them. So ritual slaughter can be, according to the animal industry people, either very humane or extreme torture. There are no federal laws set to protect standards of daily care because livestock are exempt from the Animal Welfare Act. So the day-to-day care that animals receive is simply left to the industry standard practices. How do we overcome all these barriers? We can support a shift to plant-based diets by providing accurate information to people, acknowledge the benefits of plant-based diets. We can also address the psychological barriers, the thoughts that we actually have while we're choosing food, because of course all of this comes down to what you are going to wake up and eat tomorrow, and you're there, you and yourself and your mind thinking. So those are times when you have psychological barriers that may make you decide not to choose non-animal product foods. And finally, you can advocate plant-based diets on a personal level, on an economic level, and a government level. Here's a psychological barrier. I think this is actually perhaps the most powerful one, which is that animal products taste good. If animals weren't supposed to be eaten, they wouldn't be so tasty. So chicken, pork, beef, lamb, mutton, moose, venison, rabbit, duck all taste good, so we should eat them. And human tastes are a good food guide. But the vegan view would say taste should not guide our ethics. Basing food choices on taste alone is ethically unpalatable. Cat and dog flesh, for example, there's a strong Asian market for it. You can even purchase that in the U.S. I did a web search and found the companies from whom you can buy them. Primate flesh or bushmeat is eaten in Africa and very popular. There was even an organization trying to set up a primate slaughterhouse there. Marine mammals such as dolphins or whales are killed by Japan and Norway and Iceland, and the meat is sometimes exported to Europe, other parts of Europe. There's a cat being barbecued in Africa, and actually if you go back to the pictures of meat, 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 to the picture there was 2 slides ago. The top 2 are cat meat, thigh fillet and kebab cubes. The second 2 are dog meat, ribs and top sirloin. And the final one is dog meat sausages. These are from www.kittybeef.com and puppybeef.com. Another psychological barrier is that eating animals is natural. The natural order of nature involves predators and prey, which is true. It's acceptable, beautiful even, and predation is not cruel. So these would be ideas that you might find yourself thinking when you're thinking, of course I can eat these animals. But the vegan view is that compassion is natural. The natural order does involve predation and prey, but it also involves love and mercy. We have very loving relationships in which we do not treat others as only a means to an end. We can be our own guide. We can reduce suffering in the world. We don't have to add to suffering. Even if gazelles are being killed by lions, that doesn't mean I have to go and eat a chicken. We do have food choices, and most people do not need meat to meet their needs, or dairy products or eggs. Finally, I would note that the people who are proponents of predation usually are not the prey. The vegan view is expressed well by Matthew Scully, who wrote Dominion in 2002. He says, "We are called to treat animals with kindness, not because they have rights or power or some claim to equality, but in a sense because they don't, because they all stand unequal and powerless before us." I will leave you with these bits of food for thought. The benefits of vegan plant-based diets, again, are that they are good for the earth, good for animals, and good for you. Societal barriers to adopting vegan diets can be overcome. People do overcome them. People deserve complete information about the consequences of their food choices so that you can make informed decisions about what you eat. And finally, I hope that as you continue listening to speakers tonight and as you leave this room tonight, you will please continue to give thought to what or whom you choose to eat for food. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Erica. Okay, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about the cultural and social dimensions of this whole thing, and then we'll take a short break and have some refreshments. And I guess what I'd like to do is kind of just keep this exciting here. The World Peace Diet is the book that I wrote. It has a wide range of ideas in there, and I shared a few of them yesterday. What I'd like to do, I think, just to kind of tie this together, and that was a really nice overview of the health and environmental and cruelty aspects. There's a lot more to it, and I want to kind of focus on that a little bit, and I think the best way to do it is to just give you a tiny taste of what I go through when I wrote this book, because I think if we look at this from a big picture, we see that when we choose to eat anything, whatever we choose to eat, food, is an extremely powerful force. It's our most intimate connection with nature. Our most intimate connection with the natural order is eating. It's the most powerful way any culture propagates its values through the children to the next generation is through food. Anthropologists understand this. So the first chapter of the World Peace Diet goes into the power of food. And as I said yesterday, the book is pretty long. I made it into an audiobook recently. It's 13 and a half hours of me speaking. So in this short, maybe 15 minutes, I'll just pull out a few main points. The power of food is very interesting to look into, and the sacredness that has been attributed to eating in every culture. The second chapter goes into the history of this, which I think, again, is extremely vital, very empowering. I just wish I had time tonight to go into the history of why we're eating animals for food, specifically why we eat the animals we eat. Cows, sheep, goats, chickens. Chickens are from Vietnam. They're wild from Southeast Asia. And the mentality that came with that, I believe the last revolution our culture ever experienced was the revolution when we started herding animals. That was a huge revolution, and that basically brought with it capitalism as we know it today, the emergence of a wealthy elite that controls basically all the institutions of the culture, controls education, media, government, everything, and the loss of status of women, the enslavement of animals, learning to see the earth as merely a resource to be dominated and used, beginning to see people as resources to be dominated and used, a mentality of disconnectedness, exploitation, oppression, and the beginning of war. The first war was the wealthy capitalist elite who owned the livestock, found out, I know this sounds familiar, that you get rich by going to war. Does that sound familiar? The more go to war, send the people to war, and you get capital, you get livestock, which is wealth. So this system has spread. It spread globally. It took thousands of years. It fundamentally transformed our essential human nature hasn't changed, but we've been all born into a culture that I think in many ways brings out the worst in us. It brings out this mentality of disconnectedness, the numbness, the sense of not caring, the sense of thinking, I'll just do what I want here, and the competitiveness that we find in our economic system, and the mentality of commodification and reduction, of just reducing beings to things, seeing beings as commodities to be bought and sold. And what I found in my research is whenever we do that to animals, we end up doing it to ourselves. And so the ironies abound. The ironies are that what we do to animals, the violence that we mete out to animals, boomerangs and comes right back to us in a variety of ways. Very interesting. Our own mental illness, our own physical illnesses, our social illnesses, the psychopathologies and sociopathologies that we experience ourselves, war and terrorism, drug addiction, the breakdown of the family, all of these things we force on animals. So there's several chapters after the history that go into why do people eat animals actually, and what are the forces that cause that. And also the nature of intelligence. Intelligence is the capacity of any system, humans, animals, societies, planets, to make connections and respond to feedback and continue to flourish. And when we eat animal foods, we naturally begin to numb ourselves and not want to get feedback. We learn to disconnect. And so it's very important, I think, to understand that if we really want to cultivate intelligence, real true intelligence, we must be open to feedback. And I think a lot of what we just saw, how in global warming, that issue, we just don't talk about what we're doing to animals. We just shut down feedback. We shut down our intelligence as individuals and as a culture. And so there's a lot of amazing connections and information in here about obesity, osteoporosis, all the problems that we're facing as a culture, boomeranging back to us. We force these conditions on animals and we end up experiencing them themselves, and we just don't have any ability to solve these problems because we are causing them in others. And to me it's amazing that I could go through an entire cycle of education, right? I could go through getting a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a PhD degree at UC Berkeley, which was the #1 graduate school of education in North America, and reading literally hundreds and hundreds of books and articles on all kinds of subjects, on philosophy and education, anthropology, sociology, psychology. And never once, in all this reading of the most progressive and deep and so forth thinkers and writers, come across even one sentence, one paragraph, where a writer said, perhaps the reason we have such a difficult time solving our problems is because of the mistreatment of animals for food, the mentality that's required by that. That's an unthinkable thought. That is the elephant in the living room. That's the thing that we don't talk about. It's a taboo, and it is, I believe, the driving fury behind the whole nexus, the whole web of problems that we face as individuals and as a culture, and why we are just going directly into global annihilation if we insist on continuing to eat meat, dairy, and eggs. Then there's no escape for us, from my point of view, because the violence that we put out on a massive level towards these beings, we create obtuseness, disconnectedness, and we can't effectively deal with our problems that we are creating. So those chapters go into the psychology of this whole thing, and then there's a chapter called The Intelligence of Human Physiology, which really goes into in depth, which is again what I think we have to understand. It's what are we designed to eat? What kind of foods do we have a physiology for, and do we have a psychology for? Can anyone in here, or do you know anyone, the most rabid meat eater, who could actually, go running around out in the forest and jump on a rabbit or some animal and bite into their, and through the skin? We just don't have the physiology for it. We don't have the psychology. To have the hot blood in our mouths, we'd probably be, And like true carnivores, they don't just eat the meat first. They go straight for the intestines and just eat that raw. I mean, we could never do it. So, raw fish, with the skin like bears do, you just swallow them down. I mean, it's so absurd to think that, I like my meat, it's just utterly absurd. So, and then when you look at the incredible, I call it in the book, the military-industrial meat-medical media complex. We have this massive complex that requires literally, I think, not only billions, hundreds of billions, probably trillions of dollars have been invested in building hospitals and for sick people. And so when you get people to eat a lot of meat, dairy, and eggs, you will get a lot of sick people, and that's how the whole system goes. You have to have a massive and reliable flood of very sick people for the bankers to get their investment back. But to be healthy, to have vibrant energy and have wonderful glowing health is the greatest thing, and I know you're all young, you're not worried about that, but I'm 55, I've been a vegan for almost 30 years. Madeline and I have not even been to a doctor in 30 years, ever. You can be out of the whole system. You can be free of the thing, of this whole, the drugs, going to a drugstore, I got a headache, I got a runny nose, I got a sore throat, I got to get Pepto-Bismol, I got to get some Viagra, I got to get some X-Lax, I got to get some Alka-Seltzer, I got to get, some Right Guard, I got to get some, all this stuff. I mean, if we get the pollutants and toxins out of our diets, we're free. And I think that is an amazing, wonderful thing. And so I really just encourage all of us to question the baloney that we're getting from from the military-industrial meat-medical pharmaceutical complex. There's it's just funny, really, when you look into it. There's a chapter that goes into called Hunting and Herding Sea Life, which goes into what we're doing to the oceans and what fish actually is, how the toxins concentrate in fish. And anyone who eats fish for health reasons just doesn't understand what's happening. So there's a whole chapter that I think really is illuminating to understand what we're doing to the oceans and to the beings that live in the water. Then there's a chapter called The Domination of the Feminine, which goes into what we're doing to dairy cows and chickens and the female animals in general in this whole process of eating animal foods are the most abused, and how that affects us at a deep level by disconnecting us from the feminine dimension of protection and compassion and kindness and nurturing as a culture, so that as a culture we can completely obliterate species and not care, destroy ecosystems, destroy the emotional landscapes of our children in many ways, allow violence, brutality, pornography, all kinds of demeaning and dehumanizing and devastating influences, and just accept it. And I think at a deep level it's because we've disconnected. So, and it's this feminine aspect of wisdom. I call it in the book Sophia, which is this inner intuitive wisdom that we all have that gets most violently oppressed by the culture of eating animal foods. There's then there's a chapter called it's called The Metaphysics of Food, which goes into the underlying idea that we're not just eating physical toxins when we eat animal foods, and there's a lot of them because all the toxins that are sprayed on the, for example, there are certain standards for spraying pesticides, herbicides, and other deadly chemicals on grain and things that are going to be fed to humans, but there's virtually no oversight on stuff if it's just for livestock. So all that stuff concentrates in the flesh and especially in the milk and eggs of these animals, and then they feed they enrich the feed with the corpses of other animals to make them gain weight faster. They slaughter these animals that have enormous amounts of toxins in their bodies and in the milk and in the eggs. And so all this physical toxins that we're eating guaranteed to cause high rates of all kinds of problems, cancers, and not only that, just the casein molecule, the basic protein in milk, in and of itself, we don't have renin in our stomachs like calves do to break it down, and it's the driving force behind most of the diseases and problems that little kids have, all the runny noses and appendicitis and tonsillitis and colic and sore throats, earaches, all that stuff. And it's what gives the medical industry so much money. So of course they never tell anybody about that. So we have to understand, but besides all the physical toxins, there's metaphysical toxins. We're eating grief and terror and fear and suffering and anxiety and rage. And what does that do to us? I mean, I just read the other day about how there's people that want to attack Barack Obama. They want to kill. What, are they vegetarians? I think they're vegans. I mean, I doubt it. We're eating violence and we express violence. We're eating anger and we express anger. We're eating rage and fear and we express rage and fear. So we need to wake up and realize that if we want to create a tower of beauty, we will not build it with bricks of misery and suffering and terror and pain. We need to build the tower of beauty, which is our human body, that we're here to express. It's the greatest gift we have. Build it with bricks of beauty and love and compassion, and we will experience joy. It's so simple, and yet it's completely covered over. There's a chapter called Reduction of Science and Religion, which goes into really understanding science and religion at a deep level in this culture. How both of them are I call it them the bickering brothers of the herding culture. They seem to, people say, oh, they're just against each other. They're not. They basically are coming from the same place, and they both agree that we should be dominating animals, and they both empower that in dominating nature and dominating women. And the fundamental force, which I call Sophia, which is this inner wisdom that we all have, they both attack her very much. And so it's very important, I think, to just begin, again, to what I call in the book, leave home, which is to question the underlying assumptions of our culture. And then there's a chapter on the nature of work, which goes into what happens to men in our culture and the disconnectedness from our feelings and our natural compassion, and what the slaughterhouse workers go through and what the animals go through in this incredibly violent industry, which I can tell you about, but it's beyond your wildest dreams of how violent and brutal it actually is. And then there's a chapter called Profiting from Destruction, which goes into the whole environmental effects of this, which are really important to understand, especially today with what we're doing to this planet. I mean, just global warming itself, which is, again, the main driving force is eating animal foods, could very well, according to scientists, about the feedback loops. For example, as nitrous oxide, which comes from hog farms and from manure pits, is roughly 296 times more powerful of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Methane, which comes from animal livestock, is roughly 23 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. Cutting down rainforests, which we do for animal agriculture, is a driving force behind global warming. Global warming is being driven by far more than anything else by people eating meat, and we're reaching a point. Basically, if we reach 6 degrees of global warming, 6 degrees, if it goes, the mean temperature goes up 6 degrees, and right now it's gone up 1.5 degrees. If it goes up 6 degrees, scientists say that 98% of all species on this planet will be wiped out, killed, if it goes up 6 degrees. Right now we're at 1.5 degrees, and these feedback loops are kicking in. As the temperature rises, the polar ice caps are melting. As the polar ice caps melt, there's less white up there, so there's more heat is absorbed, and so they melt even faster. As that happens, the methane stores that are in the frozen seabed are melting. The methane is coming up that's been locked away for millions of years, which accelerates the global warming. As that happens, the temperature goes up. It causes more fires, which burns more forests, which accelerates the global warming. And so a point of no return is very easily reached where it can go up 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees, and then it'll just go to 6 degrees. And there will be no more life. I mean, 2%. And we're not in that 2% humans, for sure. So if we even care about surviving on this planet, this isn't just sort of a class exercise, folks. This is actually what we're living on the environmental level, and the devastation of species is something we have to contend with. So there's the chapter on that, and then there's a number of about 3 or 4 more chapters. There's a chapter about my life, how I came to write this book, and so forth. And but the basic at the end of the last few chapters in the book are really about what I want to emphasize here, just in closing my talk now. That the basic position we're in, even though it is, I would say, and everyone understands this, I think, existentially, it is a crisis in the sense of we really need to make a transformation in this culture at a deep level. But the basic place is positive. We can all contribute. Every one of us can contribute to the healing and the blessing of our world, and we can find our unique way to contribute to the healing of our world and to the contributing of the blessing of our world. And anyone can do that. Anyone, everyone, and all of us can find our way. Madeline is, painting pictures. We can be writing. We can be talking. The most important thing, I think, honestly, is to just first of all go vegan. And really, I mean, when we walk out this door and we have our next meal, there's nothing stopping us at all from living the rest of our life every day from now on as a vegan. There's not one thing stopping us. Anyone can do it. Everyone and anyone, I don't care what your blood type is or your shoe size or your hair color or whatever it is, it doesn't make any difference. There's no nutrients in animal products that we need. So if we can move, I'm not saying you have to do it overnight. I think it's a good idea, but just move in that direction, right? Move. But come on, get the electric prod here. Come on, move. And we should move in that direction because honestly, it's like we're in a prison with no walls, and we can't see it, and we can get out of that prison. The prison has been imposed on us. It's been forced upon us against our will by a culture that has a profoundly obsolete mentality of war, domination, and violence towards life, towards females, towards babies, it's a mentality of domination and commodification. And once we see that and see that it's not our true nature, we can create a world that's not, Bush is talking about endless war. We're talking about, is this something we want to live with? That is what we will live with if we keep the endless war against animals for food. It is an endless war. They have no possibility for escaping from being devastated and destroyed and tortured and killed by us unless we choose to stop. Jesus said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." And you might as well understand, like Martin Luther King said, violence anywhere hurts everyone everywhere. We are all connected. And the violence in the slaughterhouse, the violence in the factory farm becomes the violence of cancers attacking us, mental disease, nightmares, the endless war and terrorism and microchipping of animals will become the microchipping of the human population. And Madeline says, benevolence and kindness anywhere blesses everyone everywhere. We are all connected. We can make a difference in our lives. We are making a difference. Every time I pay for a hamburger, I am making a difference. Somewhere, because of that choice, a being is stabbed. When I choose some milk, somewhere because of that choice, a baby is stolen from her mother. We are making a difference. If you live on this planet and you eat anything at all, you are making a difference. What kind of a difference do you want to make? That's the question we all have. And the beauty of it is that once we understand this and we change our behavior and bring our lives into alignment with our values, not the values of the culture that has this spinning fury at its core, we will be the foundation of a new world. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And there's nothing stopping us. And I think each one of us can find our unique way of contributing. So I just want to thank all of you for the efforts that you're making. I know everyone in this room, if you're here in this room and you're hearing these words, you have a story that got you here. And that just feed that story. Water it, love it, water that little plant. Because I know when you go outside the door, it's like we're just bombarded with just the opposite message of, oh, eat this, it tastes good, and don't worry, and this is what it's, you order ribs at the restaurant, and the waitress goes, yep, good choice, the ribs are good today, yep, good choice. She doesn't say, oh, you brute, you're paying for someone to stab an animal, what are you doing? It's just the opposite. So we have to understand that, as Jesus said, we have to adopt a higher level of mentality than the priests and Pharisees. If we want to transform this culture, that's what we're called to do. And the beauty of it is really like Gandhi said, we must be the change we want to see in the world. And the beauty is, and it is delicious. It really is delicious. I mean, it is so delicious. Madeline and I, and Harold, the three of us today had lunch together. I mean, what did we have? It was coconut milk with tofu and quinoa and millet and vegetables. I mean, I'm telling you, it gets incredibly delicious. Every meal gets more delicious than the one before. The idea that, well, it must not be very much variety or you got to give up something. It's not about deprivation at all. It's just the opposite, really. I can go on and on about that, but I won't. So the food is delicious, and as we understand this more and more, we will find it easier and easier. It's not difficult to be a vegan. It's just simply difficult being in a culture that's not vegan. So I'll close with this little poem by Shel Silverstein. It goes like this. Thanksgiving dinners sad and thankless, Christmas dinners dark and blue, when you stop and try to see it from the dinner's point of view. Sunday dinner isn't sunny, Easter feasts are just bad luck when you see it from the viewpoint of a chicken or a duck. Oh, how I once loved tuna salad, steak and lobster, lamb chops too, till I stopped and looked at dinner from the dinner's point of view. So I think this is it. It's basically making the effort to get out of the culturally induced trance of looking at our lives in a certain way and looking from a larger point of view that includes all beings in the sphere of our compassion. And as all the spiritual traditions say, as we love and give, we will be loved and we will be given to. And I have seen this over and over again. I mean, the health, the happiness, the harmony, the beauty, the joy, the love, the people, it's beyond, we will regain our purpose. We have a purpose on this planet. If we steal the animal's purposes and take it for ourselves and say that animal's born for us, she has no purpose, we will lose our purpose. And that's what's happened in this culture. We are under a pseudo-purpose of consumerism, that we're just here to consume. And I'm delighted to say, actually, that the World Peace Diet, the book, is now in its fourth printing. There are people around the United States teaching classes on this. This is being taught in college classes. It's being taught in churches, in community groups, peace groups. You can teach a class yourself if you want, facilitate a course on the World Peace Diet. The fellow who actually who actually coined the word vegan, Donald Watson, was on his deathbed about, I guess it was about 3 years ago. My book had just come out. And this friend of mine, Joe Connolly, who is the publisher of Veg News Magazine, was going over there to interview him. He was 92 years old. He was still healthy and strong. The first 2 times he went, the last time he went, he got there, and Donald Watson was in bed. And Joe called me, and he said, I just want to let you know, Donald Watson, who coined the word vegan, he's in bed, and he's basically preparing himself to make his transition. And he said he's very clear, he's very alert, and he's had a great life. But he said, I just wanted to let you know, Will, that all he does every afternoon is he just has his son-in-law read to him the World Peace Diet, read to him your book. And basically what Joe said to me is that he feels that he can now die in peace. The book has been written. And in a way, I don't feel like I wrote this book. This was a book that had to be written. Someone in the culture had to write it. And for some reason, I volunteered. I had, I guess, the unique whatever background to do it. But it's the book that creates the foundation for our culture to be able to make the next step if we're going to survive on this planet. So please do the research, get the understanding, spread the message, and we can create a beautiful world on this planet. We can do it together. There's nothing stopping us. There's literally nothing stopping us. It's just the inertia of the old obsolete mentality. Much love to you. Thank you. We'll take a short break, and we'll come back and hear Harold Brown, and then we'll have a question and answer period after the break, and we have refreshments. And Gaurav, is there anything else I'm supposed to say? Oh yeah, I'm happy to sign books. We have books here. Thank you. And also, if anyone's interested in looking at the paintings by Madeline, she has a whole lot of those paintings back there. I have CDs of music. We have the one I played from here, and books and audiobooks and books out here. And so if you want to bring any of this home, I really recommend reading the book because I've had so many people say it helped them to transform their lives in a very positive way. So we'll come back in about 5 to 7 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, and we'll continue on. Thank you.
Can I have your attention, everyone? I think we should resume the second part of this session. And I just wanted to make a quick announcement. ISU Vegetarians and Vegan Club is meeting tomorrow at 8 p.m. in Memorial Union. And if you guys are interested in participating, helping us put together this kind of events, you are very welcome, and we would love to see you at that meeting tomorrow. Please look at our Facebook page for more information about where exactly we are meeting, and just come to the meeting tomorrow, okay? And let's get started with the second session.
Yeah, that's really an important thing. That I encourage anyone who is interested at all in promoting veganism or vegetarianism to become part of this local group, ISU Vegetarians Vegans. And grab your last little items of food there. We're going to be going into the second half of our program. We'll be hearing from Harold Brown, one of my favorite speakers. Really extremely fortunate to have Harold Brown with us here. He is a very unique background. He's a person of an enormous understanding and knowledge about ecosystems, about animal agriculture, pretty much about anything. You have any question about anything at all, you just ask Harold. He'll have the answer for you. That's what I've discovered. And I'll let he'll maybe say a little bit about his journey to be with us this evening. And he was born and raised on a cattle farm in south central Michigan. He was spent 3 years in dairy as a dairy farmer, and he is now his story is one of transformation from animal farmer to vegan animal advocate, and works as an advocate for animal rights, sustainable independent family farms, environmental justice, social justice, and peace through nonviolence. He's also one of the main figures in the movie. If you have a chance to see Peaceable Kingdom, there's actually a new one. Go to tribeofheart.org. This is a new one coming out, Peaceable Kingdom, The Journey Home. And it's a very excellent movie. And we've seen some of the clips of the new movie that's coming. So there's an awful lot for us to understand. We are still just sort of scratching the surface, but I'd like to turn it over now to Harold Brown. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you guys for staying. I know how colleges can be. Food. Out of here. Okay, I think I promised some of you last night that I would tell my story a little bit, and I don't have a lot of time, but there's a lot of stuff I'd like to cover. But my story is I did grow up on a beef farm in south central Michigan. It was a family operation. And all the farms around us were owned by my great-uncles. My Uncle Kenneth, he had the farm across the road from us. He raised sheep, primarily for wool, but also for meat. Any given time, he'd have about 1,000 head of sheep. And we raised registered black Angus. And my Uncle George had a dairy farm down the road. So I grew up in this culture, know it very well. Spent over half my life in agriculture, and then in the '80s I worked in the dairy industry. I worked on my great uncle's farm somewhat, but it was like spare time I had from either our farm or the sheep farm, his farm. So it was a community effort, which is something you don't see in rural America much anymore, is this idea of community, of shared labor. It's every man for himself now. That's the way agriculture's gone. But I had a series of crises in my life. And, being human, we don't tend to pay a lot of attention to what's right in front of us. And for me, it took 3 or 4 2x4s upside the head before it got my attention that I need to make a change in my life. But it was for health reasons. And Erica, if you're skeptical about the stuff Erica shared with you, I'm living proof that it's true. I had heart disease. I reversed my heart disease with a change in my diet and my lifestyle. By going to a totally plant-based diet, and exercise and meditation, I reversed my heart disease. There are doctors doing this out in the world. Dr. Dean Ornish, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn at the Cleveland Clinic. There are people doing this, and you can. There are people through diet, meditation, exercise, reverse nearly all forms of cancer. The Kushi Institute is well known for this through macrobiotics. There's and just about anything. There's other doctors who work in plant-based diets, like there's a guy named Dr. Robert Young who works in this, and he works basically from working on alkalinity, but he claims on his website that there hasn't been a disease that's walked into his clinic he hasn't been able to reverse. So the power, the healing power, it isn't so much food. Food is important, right? But it's allowing our body to heal. The human body is an amazing mechanism that is able to overcome just about anything. But you got to give it the right fuel to do it. You've got to create the right environment for it to do it. Now, when I came to all of this, I thought, I made these changes through these crises, but it was a matter of information. It wasn't until I ended up leaving the farm because I got injured when I was working in the dairy. And when they did blood work on me, they found out I had some real problems. So they straightened me out, like first visit to the doctor, but then right after that, he calls me up and he says, I got your blood work back, we need to do a consultation. I go, oh crap, that isn't good. When you hear that word consultation, you got a problem. So I went and met with a doctor, and he asked, who is your is there heart disease in your family? I said, oh yeah, my dad and my mom, my grandparents. And they said, well, who's your doctor's attending physician? And my dad had just had a bypass operation. And he said, I told him, and he had my dad's preoperative blood work faxed over, compared them, and all the indicators that my dad had were exactly the same, but mine were twice as bad. And the doctor said, if you don't do something now, he says, you will probably have a bypass by the time you're 35. And I said, well, that's not good news. And I said, what do I do? And he gave me this little pamphlet. Well, he happened to be an osteopath. MDs in the United States, on average, get 4 hours of training in nutrition. They really, I'm not casting aspersions, but they really don't know anything about nutrition and how it impacts the body on a healing basis. They just look at it from how it gives you energy and supports the body to move you forward. But it doesn't. They don't really follow the Hippocratic teachings. Every doctor in the United States has to take the Hippocratic oath when they graduate. But the first teaching of Hippocrates is let food be your medicine, let your medicine be your food. And there isn't hardly any doctors in the United States that observe that. But he was an osteopath, and they do get more training in nutrition. So I got this pamphlet, and for my problem wasn't cholesterol, it was triglycerides. So I had to give up ice cream. Well, this plant I worked at made premium ice cream. And I was eating, that was my downfall. If I had any addiction in my life, it was ice cream. And I was eating about 3 gallons a week. So I had to give it up. Well, I was addicted to it. And there's a reason. Dairy products are addictive. The industry's known this since the 30s. That's because, as Will was talking about, this thing casein, the main protein in milk, it's what makes milk white. There's a constituent in casein called casomorphines. Morphine? You guys heard of that? Well, casomorphines, a friend of mine in Michigan has actually done a lot of the cutting-edge research on casomorphines. And that's why they market cheese to children. Because they know if they can get them hooked with Chuck E. Cheese or with string cheese or whatever, they've got a customer for life. The National Dairy Council did focus groups to determine this. And it works. Because if you talk to a vegetarian who wants to be a vegan, what's that last hurdle they got to get over? Cheese. And why is that? Because cheese is a very efficient use of fluid milk. It takes 10 gallons of milk to make fluid milk to make 1 pound of cheese. So it's a 10-to-1 concentration of all the constituents that's in fluid milk. Big problem. That's why it's so hard to give up. Luckily, I always hated cheese my whole life. The reason being, because I still think like a 3-year-old. See, I never grew up. See, 3-year-olds, and this is the way I was thinking, is we'd have a container of milk. We always had at least 2 dairy cows on our farm for our milk for our own use. But when a container of milk went sour, you pull out of the fridge, smell it, dump it down the drain. But as a little kid, I'd smell it, and I'd go, okay, you pick up this brick of cheese, it smelled as bad, if not worse. You dump the one down the drain, and the other one's called food. Well, from the perspective of a kid, that didn't make sense. Why would I not eat this? Or sour cream. Sour, mammary excretion of bovine. Why do we call that food? I would love to go back in history and find out who made the call that mammary excretion of bovine is food. Well, anyway, I'm getting away from my story. Anyway, this set me on a trajectory of being in conflict with my family because the 2 things I had to give up was ice cream and red meat. Well, I was a 5th generation beef farmer. Well, when I went to Sunday dinner and I didn't eat the pot roast, that didn't fly with my family, especially my mom. And over the next year, I was doing this for heart health. My dad already had a bypass. It should have been something they understood, but it didn't, because that is how ingrained it gets into your culture, how indoctrinated we were. So a year later, my grandmother was ready to sell the homestead, and my brother and I were going to go into a joint partnership, and I said, screw it. I said, it's all yours, I'm out of here. And we packed up our stuff and ran away to Cleveland, where I worked as a mechanic. And the very first car I worked on was this young black woman, and I fixed her car, but this bumper sticker really troubled me. I couldn't figure it out. And when I delivered her car to her and I explained everything I did, and I said, okay, you can go into the office and pay for it. But I said, can I ask you a question? She said, sure. I said, this bumper sticker, it says, I don't eat my friends, ... And I said, is that a joke? Is that saying you're not a cannibal? And she said, no, I'm a vegetarian. I said, what's a vegetarian? Now, I went to 4 years of a land-grant college, albeit it was in the 1980s. I'd never heard the word vegetarian. This is 1989. I had not heard the word vegetarian before in my life. So she explained it to me. And one thing led to another, and I got involved in a vegetarian. I went to a vegetarian potluck and hooked up with these people, and they became my little family, what I call my chosen family. I've got a biological family, but I also have a chosen family. This chosen family are my vegan and vegetarian friends that became my support group, that I was able to work through some stuff, because I had a lot of stuff in my life. Because I had been indoctrinated while I made these changes. I mean, I was only a vegetarian for a year. I read everything I could get my hands on about nutrition and heart health. And we were fortunate in Cleveland to have this Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, who had a 20-year program in reverse. He's a thoracic surgeon, first off. He does bypasses on people. But he also takes people who are scheduled for bypass, and he says, I'll give you an option. If you can change what you eat, you can get in my program. I guarantee you I'll reverse your heart disease without surgery. And a lot of people say, well, change what I eat? Oh my God, you mean eat fruits and vegetables and no oil in my diet? That's drastic. And he says, what's more drastic, changing what you put in your mouth or me opening up your chest and cracking your rib cage open? Tell me which one's more drastic. And they go, well, yeah, maybe I'll try changing what I eat, because I don't walk around with a zipper on my chest the rest of my life. So, he was a great source of information for me. And after a year of being a vegetarian, a lacto-vegetarian, I gave up eggs when I went to Michigan State University, because one of the people my senior year that I was commuting with was in poultry sciences. She was a grad student in poultry sciences, and she invited me to go down and see the barns. That did it for me. I was off eggs after I saw a battery operation. So my last thing, I was a lacto-vegetarian. And after reading and listening to the doctors and reading this stuff, it was a no-brainer. If I wanted to create homeostasis in this organism I call a body, I needed to be vegan. So I went vegan. It was an easy choice. And my vista of the foods I ate expanded. Ethnic cuisines. See, my family is Scottish by and large. And our spice rack consisted of 3 things: bay leaf, salt, and pepper. Real inventive British cuisine. So, now I've got all this ethnic cuisine. I mean, my food horizon, the foods I eat have expanded 10, 100-fold. I kid you not. Problem is now I eat too much. So I made these changes, and I got better, and I felt better, and felt better, and better, and better, and then I wasn't getting sick anymore. And I've had the same health experiences as well. I've been vegan now for 18 years, and haven't been to a doctor. It's great. I can't overstate it. But, for those of you that aren't vegan, I can stand up here. All of us could stand up here and share experiences and stories and so on, but it won't make a damn bit of difference to you. Because the one thing I do prescribe to is one teaching of Buddha, who said that the only truth in life is that you hold on to, and you know for damn certain this is true in your life, are the things you directly experience. All the rest of it is just information. It's just stuff you've read, stuff you've been told, and you can believe it. If you believe it enough, strong enough, it can become a faith. But it's just a belief. It's just information. You've got to directly experience before you can say something is so or not so. So if you think, well, veganism isn't for me, how do you know? And nobody's come from this issue farther than I have. Unfortunately, I've spent more than my fair share of time in meat packing too. And slaughtering animals, I'll tell you, it takes a part of your soul, but you can heal. You can bounce back. I have. And if I can be an old farm boy from Michigan that has basically seen it all, done it all, and now I'm a vegan animal advocate, anybody can do it. Anybody can do it. It's just, you've got a choice to make. Now, I did this because of health reasons, but the ethical and moral aspect of it, that was an intellectual pursuit. I read stuff, I read things on animal rights theory and philosophy and stuff, and it all gave you warm, fuzzy feelings. But because I was eating in the vegan style. But veganism is not a lifestyle. It's not strictly a dietary choice. as Donald Watson puts it, it's a moral imperative. It's a moral and ethical imperative. It's how you show up in the world. It's not just what you eat, the shoes you wear, or any of that. That is part of it. Those are only parts of it. What veganism is it's a moral and ethical way of living, not a diet. So forget veganism. You've got to deconstruct that. Veganism is not a diet. It's a way of being in the world. So when I understood this, I still had all this programming of my relationship to non-human animals. And I fortunately was involved with a vegetarian club that also did stuff in something called attitudinal healing that was started by a psychologist named John Polsky from California. And they created a safe place for me to deconstruct my past. And I did that, and that was very helpful. But it's funny that the final step that I needed to take to finally put it all together, to put my head and heart together, was an interaction with a steer at Farm Sanctuary. I adopted this steer, and I figured I adopted him to buy off some karmic debt. Well, I don't think you can buy off karmic debt, but I had an experience a year and a half after I had adopted him that changed my life, and that story's told in Peaceable Kingdom. And we had this interaction that woke me up. And it was just a physical bump in the chest that woke me up and took away that last layer of emotional armor I'd built since I was a kid. Because I went through 4-H, FFA, a land grant school. I had everything validating what I did for a living and how I ate. But then a steer was the one who became my lesson giver and showed me that steer, his name's Snickers, that Snickers is a subject of a life, that he has a biography, not just a biology, that he is someone, not something. And that made the difference. And that woke me up. And then my life became really complete. Now I looked at all this and I said, well, again, I thought vegans were like Christ-like, they walked on water and they came from another planet or something. But I found out they don't. They're me. But then I thought, this is a recent phenomenon. It's not a recent phenomenon. And there's a bit of wisdom. How many of you ever heard of Leo Tolstoy? Yeah. Leo Tolstoy was a vegan. Did you know that? And he wrote, as long as we have slaughterhouses, we will have war. And this goes back to what Will was saying. Violence is systemic. And after working in meatpacking, I can tell you violence is systemic. What we do to one, we will do to another. And that step, if you think that step from violence to an animal is a huge leap to violence to humans, all we have to do is go to some recent history of the Second World War. Charles Patterson, he's a professor at Columbia University, wrote a book called Eternal Treblinka. And one of the takeaway messages in his book is that during the Second World War, the SS was having trouble running these death camps. They set them up to be very efficient. They were actually based on proto-factory farm systems, and then the factory farm systems then learned lessons from the death camps, and they evolved. Actually, confinement agriculture evolved from them too. And the biggest problem they had is finding people to do the killing and the cleanup that didn't psychologically break down. They had SS officers who were psychologically breaking down because they couldn't do this work. But they had to find somebody to do the killing. Do you know who they found? They went out into the countryside of Poland, of Germany, and they got the local butcher. The local butchers could do the work. To this day, in most of the countries in the EU, butchers are not allowed to serve on juries because they learned a lesson in the Second World War that they lack a certain measure of empathy that precludes them from serving on a jury of their peers, especially in capital crimes. So I think if we think that they're not linked, that they're not together, they are. That's a very small step from one to the other. And I thought, now when I heard about Tolstoy, I go, wow, there must be other people. Well, I found out the ancient Greeks, the great philosophers like Aristotle, Socrates, they were vegans. And their academies, their colleges, we would call them, the prerequisite to be a student was being vegan. So there's a very long history of this. We're not a new phenomena. We're not a new phenomena. Those of us that are vegan or vegetarians, we're not from outer space. This isn't a new thing that's happening in our culture. It has been around for a couple thousand years or more. The Jains of India, 5,000 years at least. This is not a new phenomena. So you're not it's not a brave new world for you. You're just falling in line with a lot of really great teachers and great examples. Just learn from them. Okay, real quickly, I'm supposed to be giving you this transition from animal to plant-based agriculture. Well, it takes a little history lesson, and Will encapsulated this pretty good. We have a 10,000-year history of herding, and everybody in Western civilization is a product of a herding culture. Even though most people in the United States, 99% of the people in the United States, are not farmers. We now have a full generation of people in the United States that are totally disconnected from animal agriculture and from farming at large. According to the USDA, National Agricultural Statistics Service, NASS, just up until the Second World War, just over 50% of the population of the United States farmed. Right now, we're at just less than 1%. But yet, of that 1%, 16% of that 1% produces almost 70% of all the food in the United States. We are seeing a corporate consolidation of food production. This kind of consolidation, if it happened in any other industry, the Federal Trade Commission would be all over it. But they're not all over this because it's food. They're farmers. It's apple pie. It's the warm fuzzies again. And it's a very powerful lobby in Washington. It's also an endemic deep psychology that runs through herding culture. And what we have been taught is, and that we believe, maybe intrinsically, it isn't something we as a group consciousness have made explicit, but it is that with our relationship with the natural world is we don't have one. We just don't. And the reason being is because the deep psychology of this is that the natural world is chaos. Now, when you go to a land-grant school, your education is predicated on that as agriculturalists, our responsibility is to bring order to the chaos, to bend nature to our will so we can feed a hungry world. Well, that idea of any kind of natural balance or homeostasis is gone, at least in the institutions in America. And we're globalizing that particular kind of agriculture. And as Dr. Ford said last night so brilliantly in his PowerPoint presentation, we used to call it the Green Revolution. He says, no, it's now called the Livestock Revolution. Because that's what we're globalizing. We're globalizing the world to the Western diet. Because everybody wants to be like America. It's a love-hate relationship. They hate our politics, but they love our lifestyle. And everybody wants to eat and live like us. Well, that's not a good thing. First off, it's a violation of their culture. But the second thing is, it's not sustainable in any way, shape, or form. It takes, as Erica pointed out, livestock are hugely inefficient of turning plant kilocalories into flesh and excretion kilocalories. It's a net loss. Right now, nearly 80% of everything we grow in the United States is put down the throat of a farm animal. Nearly 80%. It's between 70 and 80. It depends. The latest research I saw from NASS is about we're like 78% of everything we grow goes into a farm animal. That's not sustainable. But the thing is, the problem is we are already at a land use deficit for agriculture in North America. And we're making up for that by dredging the seas. And one of the biggest industries, especially in China, is fish meal. And 50%, a full 50% of everything we take out of the sea is fed to farm animals or used as fertilizer for their crops. But mainly as feed supplement, because we want high energy feeds. We need protein supplements, whether it comes from a rendering plant or it comes from the fish meal industry. But we are at a land use deficit, and we're making up with it with aquatic life. And they're all, I mean, if you read, not in the United States, but you read like The Guardian or The Scotsman or any of the UK papers or the papers out of Brazil, all the fisheries are in collapse right now. They're in collapse. The cod off the northeast are gone. But yet it's used as a false flag thing for why we got to keep clubbing seals, because the seals are eating cod. Seals don't eat cod. I don't know where they get that. So what's the solution? What's the solution? Well, basically 5 corporations control all the food in North America, or in the United States, I should say. Basically 5 corporations. And these are transnational corporations. What has basically happened is we have lost the democracy of our food. We don't much have a say in how food is raised, grown, processed, packaged, and sent to us. We are mediated. I call it mediated. We're mediated into this relationship with our food. The food industry knows this. I mean, they hire the most expensive, slick PR people on Madison Avenue to create this matrix type world that we live in, where in the PR industry, they don't call it public relations. If you go in-house, these people don't call what they do public relations. They call it public perception management. That's the matrix, folks. And they know this. And the thing is that their research in the food industry has shown there's only 2 reasons people eat what they do in the United States. Number 1 is taste. Number 2 is convenience. That's it. And their research has always also shown that 98% of people in the United States get their nutritional information from advertising. Is that where we should be getting it? I don't think so. But you know, the interesting thing, what about that other 2%? That's 98% of the people. What about the 2%? Well, as Erica pointed out, about 2% of the population are vegans and vegetarians. See, we're a unique species on this planet because we have to teach ourselves how to eat. Non-human animals, they're hardwired. They know what they need to eat, not us. It's a cultural thing. We have this thing, this real problem called frontal lobes that get us in trouble all the time. So what we need to do is reclaim our food. And what this means is going out, supporting local agriculture, independent family farms. Now, don't get fooled by the term family farms, because nearly every corporate farm out there is run by a family, but they are incorporated. They're LLCs mostly. And they will sit there and Farm Bureau will say, I'll tell you right now, I think Farm Bureau is one of the most evil institutions in America, but Farm Bureau will say they're the voice of American farmers. Do you know that the majority of their memberships live in cities? You know, if you buy a Dodge pickup and you get that $60 roadside assistance package, you're automatically a member of Farm Bureau? It's a really slick thing. And the thing is Farm Bureau will go to Washington. They're one of the most powerful voices in Washington in agriculture. And they'll say, we're representing family farmers. Well, at the local, in your county Farm Bureau, it sounds like they are. That's what they're telling their members. But when you go to the national level and you see what they're doing with congressmen, with senators, what they're saying behind closed doors, and what they're proponents of industrialized agriculture, period. The only good thing that I've seen come out of Farm Bureau in the last 10 years is that they are advocating for industrialized hemp cultivation, which I'm a big supporter of, because that could really help out American farmers. But independent family farmers are the people we need to be supporting. These are your organic farmers. These are the folks at your farmers markets, your CSAs, community supported agriculture. These are the things that we need to be supporting. And we are learning in leaps and bounds how to grow food more efficiently in the organic method. We've had permaculture, we've had biodynamics, we've had straight up organics. But now we have something new, which is called, they're calling it animal-free organic techniques. They were calling it veganics because there's no animal inputs at all, because the organic standards allow for blood meal and bone meal. But this uses no animal inputs at all. I'll tell you a quick story. There's a guy by the last name of Bustos who's got a CSA out in California near Los Angeles. And he was, I forget how many shares he has, but he was supplying all of his shares on 15 acres organically. He was certified by the USDA. And then he heard about this. So a couple years ago, he switched over to this animal-free, or they also call it stock-free organic techniques. And now he's supplying all of his shares on 3 acres rather than 15. So now we've got something, and this is the first book and the only book out there on this. It comes from some folks, Jenny Hall and Ian Tolhurst from England. They've been working on this for nearly 30 years. And the book is finally written, it's finally out. This is for sale if anybody's interested. So see me afterwards, because I want to get it in people's hands and share it. If you buy it, share it. Get it in the hands of your organic farmers or anybody who's considering going organic, because this is the wave of the future. This is how we're going to change things. And this is how we work toward a vegan world. If we're going to have vegan food, we grow it veganically without animal inputs. And it's way more efficient. And it works nearly everywhere. The last story ray of hope I'll leave with you is that there was a farmer in Ontario. 2 years ago, I was doing some tabling up at the Vegetarian Food Fair in Toronto. This guy was going around to the tables, and they put all the nonprofits under one tent. And he was going around, and every so often I could hear him getting really loud with somebody. And then eventually got to over to my table, and he's talking to my wife, and she says, well, I can't answer those questions, you better talk to my husband. So we got talking, and he is a registered Demeter biodynamic farm, has been for 15 years. And he says, you've got to have animals for soil fertility. And I said, saying that is basically making the admission that all animals are ambulatory compost bins, because that's what they are. And he says, well, you're wrong, rah. And so for about an hour, we're going back and forth, and I'm trying to share some stuff with him. I said, you got to get in touch with these people. The book wasn't available. I said, get in touch with them. I gave him the website. And he walked away, and I thought, he was just basically there. He was so stubborn and stuff. I thought, well, he's gone. He came back the next year, and he came up to me, and he says, he grabbed my hand, we shook, and he says, you made an impression on me last year. I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, I contacted those people, I got the information. He says, from September to September, he said, I did an experiment. I turned half my acreage over to this veganic method, and he lives in the Grey Highlands of Ontario, and it's just high altitude, rocky land. It's poor soil fertility, and he struggled. He barely makes a living biodynamically. But he said that, and they were in the period, this is last year, so it was the second year of a 2-year drought, which we were also having in Western New York. And he said, my veganic or stock-free, animal-free acreage is outproducing my biodynamic by 50%. So it's a no-brainer. I'm going to turn my whole farm over to this. But I got another question. He says, would Farm Sanctuary take my animals? And I said, I'll ask. I think they will. And they said, I went and asked, they said yes. 2 weeks later, I'm driving a 24-foot stock trailer up to Ontario. I pick up his animals and take them back to Farm Sanctuary. See, this guy had made the connection. He saw that here is an agricultural technique that works. It works very well. He had a shift in consciousness that he became vegan, and then the moral and ethical shift that these animals do have worth. They do have their own self-interest. and he couldn't sell them for auction, and he couldn't eat them, so he turned them over to a sanctuary. So things are moving forward. We just have to keep that message going. So do whatever you can. I have some information sheets back there if you want to learn more about agricultural issues and animal issues. And, I appreciate your time and look forward to your questions in a little bit.
Thank you. Erica, are you here? Are you ready? So we'll just have a closing a panel for a few questions. I know we're running a little late here. It's already a little bit after 9, but we're happy to answer questions. And just let me reemphasize that there's really some great information. Those nice bright green flyers back there from Erica and what the work she's doing. Make sure you take some of those. We have also sheets. We have a sign-up sheet for our website, which is worldpeacediet.org, and Harold has information as well. So if you have a question, please come to the microphone and address it to us. We're happy to answer your questions.
I have a question for each of you. For Erica, I want to know if pinto beans give you protein. For Mr. Brown, I'd like to know what are the 5 corporations that control food production. And for Mr. Tuttle, why isn't there an index in your book?
Yes, pinto beans do give you protein. I believe if you had a can of beans, per serving, it's usually around 7, 8, or 9 grams of protein. Depends on the bean. And I know they have beans because your spouse cooks pinto beans every week and you're still eating them and surviving.
Okay, well, probably the 5 biggest players would be Cargill. And just for your information, Cargill is the world's largest privately held corporation. There is no other corporation in the world that comes close to Cargill. It's Cargill, ConAgra, Kraft, ADM, Archer Daniels Midland, and Monsanto. Those are your big 5.
That's you're doing a lot of damage. That's a good question about the index. As I said, we're up to edition number 4, and originally there was going to be an index, but the book is printed on 100% post-consumer recycled paper, soy-based inks, and the price of the book was high enough for the publisher, which is Lantern Books in New York. And if we put in an index, it was going to make the book thicker, take up another 16 pages, and was going to have to raise the price from $20 to $24. And we really argued about it quite a bit. I really wanted an index in there, and he said, no, it's going to be too expensive and too big. So there is an index online. I paid an indexer to make an index. And there's an index. If you just go to worldpeacediet.org and just click on index, you can download a PDF file, a 16-page or 15-page index. It's very well done, very good index online. And Martin the publisher did promise that the next edition of the book will have an index in it. So it is coming, because I know it really helps. There's so much information in there, and it's good to have an index. So. It's just the name of the book, worldpeacediet.org. And actually, I'll just mention, there's a new website we're just starting called worldpeacediet.net, which has forums and discussion groups, and there's a place there for people who want to facilitate classes on the World Peace Diet, to talk with each other, and I think it's really helpful to work together using all the resources we have, like the internet, to discuss the issues and things. Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, something you touched on yesterday was the economics related to using animals and how that's really kind of a hurdle to get over for people who are, farmers, who you gave it as an example, a chef, and so it's just such a huge business. And Eric and I talk about this, how nationally and globally, it's just a huge amount of money. I mean, billions and billions of dollars that people get from using animals. And I mean, if everyone were to become vegan right now, throughout the world, or throughout the United States, those people that rely on animals for their incomes, how would that transition occur? Or, has there been any studies been done on how that would occur, or how do you see that transitioning to that? So I guess I've always wondered about that.
Right. Yeah, great question. And I think it's a big question, and I think it's one that deserves maybe more attention. I talk a little bit about it in the World Peace Diet in the chapter on profiting from destruction, that really it's somewhat like the military. You put a lot of money into it. You don't get a lot of jobs out of it, actually. You get a lot more jobs when you put money into things like reforesting and other things. So I think it's natural for a culture or for society to evolve, and some jobs are lost, but new ones are gotten. When that happens. My great uncle, I think he was a guy named Putnam. He owned the Putnam Nail Company, and they made their living. He made his living by making horseshoe nails, and when people switched over from horses to cars, he was out of a job. And that was that happens. But he found a job, in something else that opened up. So as a culture evolves, it won't happen overnight. I mean, it will. I mean, I'd love it in a way if it would happen overnight, but I think it's going to take at least 10, 20 years probably. And it'd be great. Wouldn't it be great to be vegan in 20 years? That would be great, wouldn't it? Let's just go for it. But in that 20 years of change, or whatever it is, there'll be transitions that will happen, and I think some people had the idea that we couldn't do it because we couldn't go vegan because what would happen to the farmers? I mean, like, we couldn't stop war because what would happen to the war machine? What about all the people that have, we couldn't stop, drug running because what about all the people that make their money on drugs? It's a violent, horrible thing, and that's not a reason to keep doing it. So I think there are so many things that are just yearning to be done, and our government, for example, if we had some intelligence, which I think going vegan would entail, could support programs. We could solarize the country, right? We could replant forests. We could do so many things. We don't have to work so darn much. I mean, we have these long work hours creating most of the stuff we don't even need. So I think gradually we would be transforming our entire worldview. I think we have to realize that imagining a vegan culture is imagining an entirely different culture. We are looking at something completely different, and it's a wonderful exercise to do. Just take a moment. I mean, just take maybe 5 minutes sometime and just sit down and just start thinking about what would happen because sometimes people ask us this. I'm sure Harold gets this question all the time. What are you going to do with all those cows? They're going to take over the earth. They'll probably eat us all up. We got to kill them before they kill us. What are we going to do with all those cows? That kind of idea. But it's a beautiful question. Just stop and think about what would happen when people stop eating cows and chickens and pigs, and then we would need to rape fewer, cows and to get more cows. So we would just gradually. Only reason there are all these cows is because we forced them into our lives by impregnating them. So as that happened, there would be less need for so much grain. We could start to bring back wildlife, habitat. The streams would run more clear. People could have different jobs that weren't so violent and destructive. We could begin to rebuild our whole world. Education, creativity, art, music. I mean, do we have enough? We have too many artists, too many musicians, too many people restoring the environment. There's so many jobs that need to be done that we are not doing because we have so many people in the medical industry stabbing people who are eating animals that have been stabbed. So I think just think of the positives of it, and on every level, the economy would be much, much healthier. Having healthier people, you'll get a lot more done. You won't need so many pharmaceuticals and so forth. And that's a lot of people think, well, what are you going to do with all those doctors? Forget about the farmers. I mean, it's the doctors that are the ones that are really scared. They're really terrified of this, We got armies of doctors that, they need a lot of sick people. What are you going to do with all them? And what about the whole war machine? We won't need that anymore, really. I mean, if we get the violence out of ourselves, so we have to start thinking of another way of living. It's big. it's a good question, you know. But I know everybody's allowed, so this one's going to go on forever here. But
I'd like to add a word on that topic. Paul, my spouse, and I talk about this. I work at Iowa State, so I can give a view of what I see happening at Iowa State with progress toward creating plant-based foods. There have been changes over the last 10 years. My general impression, like I said in the slideshow, is that most of the money is supporting animal agriculture at ISU. They have a pork center, a beef center, all affiliated with ISU. But in our department, Food Science and Human Nutrition, there is a Dr. Wilson. He calls himself Dr. Tofu, and he works all on soybeans, mostly, and works on research to make the products more palatable. So that is the one person I know on campus who's really striving to make plant-based foods more prevalent. The Center for Crops Utilization Research at ISU is doing some work on plant-based foods. However, they are growing adzuki beans in Greene County, which is west of us here, and their intention for the adzuki beans is to export them to Japan, where more people eat tofu. They also have done some corn research to show that corn that's grown in Iowa actually is suitable for tortilla use, so you can ship it to Mexico. So they are following the rules of supply and demand, which is why it is so important to encourage people to figure out why they should start eating plant-based foods, because if people eat them, supply and demand will quickly turn around and you will have people providing what you want and what you buy.
Well, part of my activism is actually working with farmers to get them to switch over to plant-based. And one of the first challenges is when a guy is raising animals, he's usually raising crops too. But he says, all I can raise is hogs, all I can raise are cows, all I can raise are chickens. And it's like, this is all I know. And I challenge, say, is that all you know? You know, you mean tell me you only know one kind of farming? So what I try to do is I challenge them to think outside the box, and that there are other ways to do it. But the thing is I'm not saying we should become Luddites and turn agriculture back 50, 60, 70 years. What I'm saying is we got to create a new paradigm in agriculture. In other words, we've got to look at, maybe get away from futures trading altogether, because that's destructive in and of itself. And the thing is if we go back to a more agrarian lifestyle, where we put that 50% that disappeared from our landscape, get them back on the land, that's going to create more jobs, just by sheer numbers. You're just going, if you're doing organic agriculture and you've got CSAs and you've got people, doing labor on the farms, or allow people, because I get a lot of people email me and say, I want to get back to the farm, or I want to start farming. How do I do that? Well, there's this huge, huge silent movement of people that want to get back to the earth. And there was a recent study I thought was really interesting that came out not long ago about where they did some tests on people, blood tests and brain mapping, and they found out that humans are hardwired to enjoy getting their hands in soil. That going out and getting your hands in soil actually has this endocrine response with us that releases dopamines and serotonin. So we actually find it therapeutic and restful to get your hands in the soil, get your hands dirty. We have this innate primal connection to the earth that we've broken. That's why CSAs are so darn popular right now. People want to get back out, even though they may feel they can't afford a farm. They want to get out there, get connected to their food, and get their hands dirty. And that's a great thing. We've got to take that and run with it, because it's healing for us to farm. It's healing for us to garden. We need to do more of it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's very positive, powerful work. Yes. Yeah. Can you go to the maybe like, or you don't mind? Sorry, but I guess this is being recorded, so nice. Great. Thanks.
Do you think that it'd be easier to talk to farmers about making that transition if you talk to them about advertising locally, as opposed to trying to do some big, huge transition, that it would be more manageable and feasible for them to do that?
I can't shake my head. I got to talk. It's being taped. Yeah, exactly. That's what it's about. It's about developing direct markets. It's getting away from, this food production system where, like, they've looked at pasta. If you've got a wheat pasta and you've got a guy who's growing wheat, if he was selling that wheat directly at a farmer's market, either in flour or whole, because some people like to grind their own, if he was selling it either as flour or whole wheat at a farmer's market, every dollar he gets is giving him a fair return on what it cost him to do it. But for that same farmer, if he's selling it to the market to be processed into pasta for some, like Ippolito pasta, his return is 2 cents on the pound, on average. I think that Michael Pollan went into that in his first book, is how the more processing there is, the less the farmer makes. So what we need to do is support our local farmers and go out there ourselves and make the direct market for them, because they may not know how to do it. Because we've got a generation of farmers that are in commodity markets and futures markets that can't even conceive that they could create direct markets. And that's what we need to do, is help them. And this could be a whole new cottage industry, is setting up a cottage industry that builds direct markets and facilitates that.
I have a comment about farmers in Iowa. The irony of Iowa, of course, is that we have the most fertile topsoil in the world, although we've lost half of it since 150 years ago. As a vegetarian, though, you would think that somewhere in Iowa they're actually growing legumes for people. If you go to Wheatsfield Grocery, our natural food store, which I do, and ask the source of their legumes, none of them come from Iowa. If you look at the USDA list of dry bean production in the U.S., they mention Nebraska, they mention other states, but they don't list Iowa at all because the legumes are not being grown here for people. I talked with a professor in the agronomy department who works for the USDA, and he said part of the problem is if people want to grow the legumes here, they don't have the processing facilities available. So you have to get the hard structure in there to process the crops. And of course, to do that, you have to have the demand for the beans. I asked Wheatsfield Grocery, how often do you get through one of the bins that they have there of soybeans, those dispenser bins? And the person who worked there said it might take about 3 weeks. He wishes it would go faster. So I think the bean people who grow beans could do a much better job of advertising so that instead of having "you got milk" in our heads, you could have "got beans" or something else, so that we would think beans are wonderful and delicious.
Well, the other problem with that too is the subsidy market. The subsidy programs we have for crops. Bean farmers that are growing like Adzuki beans, they can get, possibly, if they get any kind of relief, it's in crop disaster subsidies. But as far as straight up subsidies, there's basically 5 crops that get the lion's share of subsidies in the United States, and 3 of them are feedstuffs for animals. Well, actually 4 are feedstuffs for animals. The other is cotton. But even cotton meal is used for poultry. So, but by and large, the bulk of cotton is made for fabric. It's a fiber. But the other 4 are feeds for animals, not food for humans. So it's everything. The whole system is skewed toward that. And that's always been my gripe about the subsidy program in the United States. Every year, or every 5 years when the subsidy program comes up, I'm always arguing, why don't you invest in communities rather than commodities? And they won't do it because they don't care about rural communities. All they care about is commodities. And that's what we got to do. We got to take the system here in the United States and we got to turn it on its head. We've got to get people that are representing our agricultural states politically on board with this. Luckily, we've got one guy in Virginia now who is a farmer, and he will consider this. And I can't remember his name. The guy in Virginia is Webb, but the guy from Montana, he's an organic farmer, and he's on the Senate, and he's an organic farmer. There's a perfect opportunity. We need to get more guys like him in office in these ag states so that we can create a new paradigm.
I want to thank all of you for coming. It's almost 9:30, and it's been I know the time's flying by, and we just love to keep this thing going probably all night here. But I also feel some responsibility to everyone. So maybe just to wrap up here, we've thrown... if you were here, especially both nights, we've discussed a lot of different angles on this whole thing. Please continue the adventure and the exploration and the discussion and the conversation, because this is just the beginning, and this is, I believe, is the absolutely most vital questions we can ask. How do we live? What do we eat? And this idea of connecting with whole foods, organically or veganically grown, and just spreading the message of compassion for all life and living that in our own lives. The benefits are enormous. So keep up the great work. Please don't forget to be in touch with Gaurav and the ISU Vegetarian Vegans. Be on the lookout for any opportunities you have to serve and to create communities. Realize that the only reason we ever ate animal foods was because of the communities. And really for me, and I think for pretty much all of us who go vegan, the reason we do that is because of communities. It's because of, this is a community right now. We have it, sort of a temporary, 2-day community. But we can keep these communities going, work with the local people, work with Erica. We've got lots of possibilities. And actually, just to let you know, we have on the back here, on Saturday night I'm giving a concert at the Unity Church here in Ames, and on Sunday a workshop on developing intuition right after the service at the Unity Church. And there's going to be a vegan, the first time the church has ever had a vegan meal. So we're gonna, come on over. You can, if you want to take a flyer on Sunday after the service. The service is at 10:30, and then probably around noon we'll have a vegan meal. And just kind of keep the momentum going in whatever way you can plug in, because there's nothing, again, as I say, that's more health affirming and life affirming than to do that. And there's so much more we could talk about, but just thanks again for coming. Much love to you all. Keep up the great work, and we look forward to our paths crossing again. Thanks again. Much love. Thank you. Keep it up.